Hello, horror hunters. Bring me the nightmare here with another collection of horrifying stories. This time we are going camping. As always, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like and comment on the video, and click the bell to turn on notifications so you never miss a video. Without further ado, let's get into the stories. Story 1, Screams Beyond the Campfire. I've never been much of an outdoor person, but the summer after my second year in college, one of my roommates convinced me to go tent camping with him. It was just for the weekend, and since I had no other plans, I agreed to join him. For privacy's sake, I'll call him Jake. Jake went all out for the trip. He drove a 2014 Jeep Wrangler, and the back seat was nearly filled with camping gear. Rather than reserving spots at established campsites, he preferred to find his own, believing it added to the adventure. We drove into the Rocky Mountains until we found a clearing in the trees big enough to fit the Jeep. After some off-roading, I pointed out a suitable spot, and we set up a fire pit, chairs, and our tent for the night. It was around 7 p.m., and the sun was beginning to set. Jake retrieved a bag of hot dogs from the car for dinner. I know it was a cliché camping meal, but it was easy and part of the experience he wanted to share with me. He even brought supplies for s'mores, though we never got that far. As we cooked the hot dogs, a piercing scream echoed through the trees, about 300 or 400 feet away. Jake's head snapped around toward the sound. At first, we couldn't make out any words, but then we heard cries for help, please, and desperate no's. Suddenly, the most terrifying scream was abruptly cut off. The look on Jake's face was pure horror. The nearest man-made structure was the road, which was far from us. There shouldn't have been anyone out there. We realized we needed to leave immediately. We frantically tossed our gear into the back of the Jeep, stuffing the still-assembled tent inside as we closed the door. I tried calling 911 as we drove back to the road. I had almost no service, but somehow I managed to reach an operator. I explained what we had heard, and they assured me they would send a trooper as soon as possible. It took us twice as long to get back to the road since we couldn't see anything in the dark. When we finally reached the pavement, we stopped, unsure if we should wait for the police. That's when we saw a figure emerging from the trees in front of us. He was a man in his 50s, wearing jeans and an all-black sweatshirt with the hood pulled low over his face. He was dragging something behind him, wrapped in a heavy sheet or bag. His head hung low as he walked. When he noticed us, blue and red police lights flashed down the road. The man turned and sprinted back into the forest, abandoning the bag. The police immediately pursued him. Later, we learned that the bag contained the remains of a 34-year-old woman. We don't know if he was ever caught. Story 2, The Silent Visitor. This incident occurred when I was in middle school during a month-long all-boys summer camp. The campsite was exactly as you might imagine. 6 or 7 small cabins scattered in the forest, a small lake, a few fire pits, and possibly even a sand volleyball court. It was about 4 hours out of town. The place was old and run down, but still frequently used for summer camps. Upon arrival, I unpacked my belongings into one of the cabins and set up my bed. Some of the other kids wanted to explore the forest before dinner, and since the camp rules were pretty laid back, we ventured out as long as we could still see the cabins. While walking, one of the kids pointed out a man standing a few yards away, looking in our direction. He appeared to be over 50, dressed in dirty clothes with a rough gray beard. We assumed he was one of the camp counselors. He gave us a strange smile, and I awkwardly waved back before we ran to our cabin. That night, we reported the encounter to one of the camp counselors. They took it seriously and went to investigate, but by then, the man had vanished. We soon noticed that most of the counselors were teenagers, none older than 30. It didn't seem like they had any idea who the man was. For the next few days, we avoided exploring further, still feeling uneasy. On the 4th night, things escalated. I woke up to the sound of our cabin door handle rattling. Typically, at around 11 p.m., a counselor would knock on the cabins to remind us to lock our doors and go to sleep. I thought this was what was happening, but since I had no way of telling the time, I wasn't sure. Being the only one awake, I felt compelled to respond, so I yelled that we were already in bed. Just then, a flashlight flickered on outside, shining in through the windows. Someone was trying to see inside. A few of the other kids began to wake up, and I motioned for them to get down. The person outside circled the cabin multiple times, shining the light through every window. I don't know if they saw me, but I could tell the light passed over me several times. After 5 minutes, the light finally turned off and silence returned. I explained to the other kids what had happened, and one of them checked his watch. It was 4 a.m. This was no counselor. We stayed awake until morning. When a teenage counselor came to wake us up for breakfast, we immediately told him what had happened. He stopped and took us to some adult counselors to share our story. What we heard next terrified us. The night before, a kid from another cabin had gone for a walk to use the bathroom. On his way back, he noticed someone at our cabin door. Initially, he thought it was a counselor, but he soon realized the person was trying to pick the lock. He described the man as having a beard and wearing dirty clothes, which matched the man we had seen in the forest on the first day. The camp was immediately canceled for the safety of the kids. That afternoon, a bus arrived to take us home. Years later, I did some research and found a small report about the incident. Police were called in after we left. They searched the area and discovered a small tent nearby. Inside were the essentials and hundreds of Polaroid pictures of the camp, the cabins, the canoes by the lake, the fire pits, everything. Disturbingly, there were also pictures of the kids, most taken from a distance or in a way that suggested the photographer was trying to hide. The most unsettling images were those taken at night through the cabin windows. The police waited for someone to return to the tent, but no one ever did. The man was never found. Story 3, The Last Campfire. As summer came to an end, my wife and I decided to go camping one last time before the weather turned cold. I had a lot of camping gear left over from college trips and wanted to put it to good use. There was one spot we used to frequent, not an official campground, but a great location we had discovered. When we arrived, we noticed a makeshift fire pit and some litter, indicating that others had camped there too, but we didn't mind. We set up our tent and started a fire, spending hours talking and drinking. Suddenly, around 2 a.m., we were startled by the sound of a chainsaw starting up. Initially, we thought someone might be cutting down a tree, but it seemed odd for someone to do that at such a late hour. Our unease escalated when we heard maniacal laughter following the chainsaw noise. Feeling creeped out, we extinguished the fire and climbed inside our tent. The sound was distant, so we felt somewhat safe, especially since we had a machete for protection if needed. However, it soon seemed like the noises were getting closer. Thankfully, the chainsaw abruptly stopped, and a wave of relief washed over us. After about 30 minutes of silence, we felt comfortable enough to attempt sleep, likely aided by the drinks we had earlier. At some point during the night, I woke up, confused about what had startled me. As I regained my senses, I heard footsteps outside. I sat up and saw my wife had also awakened. We listened intently. There were multiple sets of footsteps, no more than 20 yards away. My wife suggested we make a run for the car, but I wanted to wait a few minutes. The moonlight illuminated the tent, and I could see the silhouettes of 3 men on the tent wall. I didn't tell my wife this. I didn't want to scare her. Instead, I gripped the machete tightly, horrified at the thought of having to use it. Seconds felt like hours as I watched the shadows. Finally, after what was probably only a couple of minutes, the figures walked away. This was our chance. I told my wife it was time to go. Leaving everything behind, I opened the tent and we sprinted to the car. I was immensely grateful for my remote start key fob. I started the engine as we ran, and as soon as we were inside, I floored it out of there. Only then did I tell my wife about the shadows on the tent wall, and she scolded me for not telling her earlier. We spent the night in a hotel. The next morning, we returned to the campsite, only to find that all our belongings were gone. Not a single item was left behind. I still don't know what really happened that night. Part of me thinks we unknowingly trespassed on someone's private property and they were trying to scare us off. But it's also possible they intended us real harm. Either way, they now have all our camping gear. I don't see us going camping anytime soon. That was a chilling collection of stories. Which was your favorite? Leave a comment down below. It will be a while before I find myself in a tent after those. If you have made it this far, thanks so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed listening to this as much as I enjoyed making it. Until next time, horror hunters, this is Bring Me the Nightmare signing off.